it's always about fear. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if you or anybody's heard about mambas, black mambas chase people. Mm-hmm. I have never been chased by a mamba. I've chased the poor things. I've never been chased back,
Yeah.
But I've also had experiences with my friends. It's actually one of the funniest things I've ever seen. But we found this massive Southern African rock python just outside my mom's house. And me and my good friend and his fiance were with me. And if you give a rock python a fright, they will sort of move, they fling themselves away to get the motion going. So obviously, if they're moving away from you, they first sort of coil towards you and then they shoot off in the opposite direction.
Right.
These guys turned around and ran for their lives. This is a couple that love each other. They didn't even look to help each other. They just ran away. And from their perception, they were being chased.
Welcome back to the Animals at Home podcast. My name is Dylan Perrin, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Today, I'm speaking with Rom Gonsalves, who is a reptile keeper out of South Africa, and we had a really wonderful conversation. It's an amazing talking to somebody who's grown up in South Africa, a place that is so rich and diverse with some of the most incredible wildlife on this planet. But the way I got to know Rom is because he's a listener to the podcast, and he's actually one of the patron members of the show. And so in the Discord server, he's always sharing some incredible stories or some incredible video footage of him going and relocating venomous snakes, whether that's Black Mamba or cobras or whatnot. Of course, in South Africa, there are a lot of people that are very afraid of snakes and often want to kill them. So there's a group of people that go out and relocate these animals, and he is one of them. So he started sharing all these videos in Discord, and then one of the other patrons was like, hey, you need to be on the podcast because it looks like you have some incredible stories to share. And he did. We talk about, I think one of my favorite parts of this conversation is when he just talks about the black mambas and what it's like to have to relocate that animal and how amazing that animal is. And I don't want to get into it because he does a perfect job explaining everything about that species. And we talk about just his care, how he's gone from keeping many different types of animals, including having his reptile collection expand to a bunch of cobras and breeding, and now how he's now whittling it down and focusing more on care and trying to expand his enclosure size. And he's also has this incredible property that he's going to be developing over the next couple of months or a year, and having outdoor enclosures for native species of snakes. And it was a absolutely enjoyable conversation. I know you will enjoy it as well. If you want to join us on Patreon, you can do that at patreon.com/animalsathome. And if you want to find more information on this episode or any other episode of this podcast or any other podcast that happens to be on this network, head to animalsathomenetwork.com. Thank you so much to customreptilehabitats.com for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Again, affiliate links are in the YouTube description as well as the show notes. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see that behind me I'm in a slightly different area in my basement. My basement is pure chaos right now. Paul from Custom Reptile Habitats has sent me a bunch of enclosures that I'm slowly assembling. There's one right over my shoulder here and a bunch of universal rock stuff as well. So I am very excited to completely do a makeover of this room. It's going to be happening soon. I haven't even really done a tour of this room because I knew these enclosures were coming. So over the next couple of months, if you're not subscribed on YouTube, definitely go subscribe because you'll see me not only assembling the enclosures, but then also putting together each enclosure for each animal. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to look really cool. It'll change the background of the podcast, and yeah, I'm excited, so I'm sure you will be as well. So if you're not subscribed on YouTube, make sure you go do that. And other than that, let's jump into this episode with Rom. Enjoy. Well, Rom, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really, really excited about this. Yeah.
We've got to know each other a little bit. You're part of the Patreon group, as well as even before Patreon, we've sort of messaged back and forth on Instagram. And I know you listen to the show, and you have you live in South Africa, which is, I think, fascinating for most people. And you work with, seems like you've been working with reptiles for a long time. So I definitely want to pick your brain for some things. But I really want to start with life in South Africa, because this is one of those countries where it is so far removed from the Western countries, Europe and Canada and the United States. It's just so different. It seems like such an eclectic experience growing up there. So why don't we just start there? What was it like to grow up in South Africa, and how did that impact your passion for wildlife?
I won't lie, it's absolutely amazing living here. I'm overly passionate about this place. So the part of South Africa where I stay, eastern side of South Africa, that's where you get that. If you think of Africa, that's sort of more like where I'm staying. So if I could just paint a very brief picture of where I live right now. So I live in the capital of a province, okay? It used to be called Nelspruit. It's now called Mbombela. But basically, it's a capital of a province. So it's a big city. We have giant shopping malls and massive hospitals. And I mean, there's people driving Ferraris and everything. So, I mean, we're not limited in terms of South Africa is actually a great place in the sense that it's not wild Africa where there's nothing. We have everything you can get, all the brands, everything. And obviously with social media, I can sort of, I mean, the world's so well connected. I mean, I can see I'm missing out on nothing in terms of what I can buy, the lifestyle I can live. But there's just that added element of living in South Africa that's absolutely amazing, and that's the wildlife. So like I'm saying, I live in a huge city. If you had to take an aerial view, I've even flown over here with a helicopter. It's just green bush. It's so beautiful. So most of this side of South Africa, I'd say there's about 3 or 4 of our 9 provinces are all on the far east. And yeah, to paint a picture of exactly where I live, almost every day I have monkeys in my garden. My dogs are barking at monkeys. There's owls, there's mongooses. Even just I live in the suburbs, and we'll get not big antelope, but I'm not sure if many of the guests are familiar with some of the species I'm going to say, but we get red duiker, grey duiker, jackals, white-tailed mongoose, banded mongoose, dwarf mongoose, lesser bush babies, thick-tailed bush babies, a number of owls, eagles, birds of prey in the suburbs. So, I mean, Wednesday's garbage collection day here. We can't put our rubbish out on Tuesday night because I know a jackal or a genet or a white-tailed mongoose is going to come and break the bags and eat the leftovers and things like that. So there's literally wildlife everywhere. And then we've also got the added benefit. It's not a new thing, but throughout our area, just outside of town, like a K out of town, some of these places are in town. My mother lives there in a place like this. My fiance's mother lives in a place like this. And some of my friends do. And by a place like this, I mean wildlife estates. So literally in my mom's garden, there are giraffes and zebras and big game just walking. Like, I mean, we can't grow lemons at my mom's house because the giraffes are eating them the whole time and weird things like that. It's just insane. So that's quite commonplace in the area I live. We're also close to the Kruger National Park, which is a huge game reserve, one of the oldest in the world, Big 5. I can drive 30 minutes in almost every direction, and I'm going to end up at a place where I can see elephants, hippos, rhinos. I don't know, in many places in the world, I'm sure you get those warning signs on the side of the road, like a picture of a cow. We literally have a picture of a hippo because you might hit a hippo at night. So there's just wildlife everywhere here. And with that, so Cape Town on the far western side of South Africa, it's very dry and a lot of agriculture and things like that. So it's very city life there, and there's not a lot of Big 5 and big game because it's been persecuted for many of years. Mm-hmm. Then goes the Highveld. So then it goes up to Johannesburg, one of our capitals, and there's nothing. I hate that place. I know for anybody that lives there, and it's the worst place on earth. It's dry, flat, nothingness, and just factories and monoculture, cornfields, and then big city. And then after that, you drop down into what we call the Lowveld, which is just an assortment of mountains and valleys and rivers and just nature everywhere. So I literally, of course, I live in quite a mountainous area. If you stand on one side of one of the valleys, you can barely see the houses through all the trees. Wow. So I'm obsessed with this place.
And is that where you grew up? Is that the area of South Africa where you were born?
Yeah, so I was born just a bit north, but I came here to the specific town when I was about 2. So, I mean, this is all I've experienced. And then, back to the question of how did this influence my passion for wildlife? It's everywhere. It's everywhere. I lived in the suburbs most of my life, and there's wildlife literally everywhere. And then, obviously the culture here is very wildlife orientated. I mean, most people have what you guys would call pickups because you're going to the bush. Camping, fishing, hunting, just bush activities is massive here. And then a lot of our holiday homes I don't know if you've heard of Sabi Sands or if anybody's heard of Sabi Sands, but if you watch a lot of wildlife documentaries about leopards or hyenas or any of that, it's literally in Sabi Sands, and we have a holiday home. So most people's holiday homes is you live around wildlife, you get a bit of free time, you go to the bush, and it's just big five. It's insane. I could talk about this for ages. I'm a big advocate of my part of the world.
Well, it's funny. Whenever I talk to someone from South Africa, like Bryce Broom, for example, he gives the same answer, just totally obsessed with the wildlife and the ecology and the environment. And so when you see those animals, even though they are a regular occurrence, are you just as amazed and fascinated every time, or does it start to sort of like habituate and you get kind of bored, like, oh, there's another hippo on the road?
Those things I get habituated to, like a zebra and a giraffe, impala, kudu, eland, sable, all those sort of big game. I literally see them too often to get excited. So that stuff, yeah. But there's always those all the little predators that we see, and I actually did falconry for a while. So birds of prey in the garden and stuff, I'm obsessed. So I still get very, very excited. But of course, there are the animals that you don't even pay attention to because you see them all the time. Impala, every South African that I've ever met will not stop to look at an impala because they're just everywhere.
Yeah. It's like seeing deer here. Well, I kind of have a similar experience. I have lots of bald eagles in my area, and that's a remarkable bird. And if Americans, there's a lot of Americans that don't have them in their area, and it's their national bird, so they're sort of obsessed with them. And I see a bald eagle easily on a weekly basis, maybe several, just because there's lots. I live on a river, but every time I see it, I'm amazed. I'm like looking out my car, like probably driving all over the place because I'm trying to look through the sunroof, and I'm like, even though I've seen so many of them, but there are just certain animals where every time you see it, it's just you have to get the best view of it.
Yeah, I agree. I often pull off over the side of the road, and this sounds a little bit gruesome, but most of the time when you're driving, you also see roadkill.
Right.
I can't not. Sometimes I've literally once, I was driving to university. I drove something like 50 Ks. I was just, no, don't worry. I literally turned back because you go back and you look what's been hit on the road. And sometimes it's the most insane animals. So I know that's very gruesome, but there's just wildlife everywhere. And it's just so interesting to see in every aspect. I mean, it's exciting.
Yeah. So then what about reptiles? Did you had this passion and interest for animals growing up in this amazing area? Were reptiles always at the top of the list of something that you were more drawn to, or how did that work?
Not number one, but definitely up there with number one. So my Instagram page, the Croc River collection, right? That is literally borrowed from when I grew up, from probably 7 years old. Every birthday. Every single year for my birthday, I went to the snake park called the Croc River Reptile Park. And I've always been obsessed with reptiles, completely. But I'm also obsessed with birds. So growing up, I always had snakes, but the majority of my time and energy was first with birds. And then it slowly, for a number of reasons, then moved over to reptiles. But I just remember being a kid and a puff adder in our garden, and there was like a big commotion. There's a puff adder. I don't even know how young I was, and I just remember seeing this puff adder and being absolutely blown away. It's still my favorite animal, not even my favorite snake. My favorite animal is a puff adder from that experience. I just love them. We also had a Jack Russell that once killed this. When I was also really young, it killed a Mozambican spitting cobra in our garden. And my dad put it in a jar with methylated spirits or something. And just watching that. And then you're often exposed to these things.
So the Jack Russell killed the cobra without taking a bite?
South African Jack Russells are born different. I don't know one Jack Russell that hasn't killed a snake. If you speak to any South African, you ask them about Jack Russells, they've been hit by a car and killed a snake. That's just a fact. They are just machines out here. That actually particular story, we tried to get out of our car when we got home, and the Jack Russell came to attack us. And we kept closing the door. We're like, what's going on? What's going on with the dog? And every time we opened, he would attack us, and he'd run into the bush, into the flower bed. And then he pulled out this cobra, and he just wouldn't let us come out of the car. it was insane. And then even once the snake's dead, it still twitches. He didn't let us out the car until the snake stopped twitching, and then we could get out, no problem.
Wow.
So it was a really good dog, but also very sad at the same time. But Jack Russells are machines, yeah. It's actually later, if we speak about that human-wildlife conflict type thing, dogs do not always come out on top, unfortunately.
Yes. Yeah. My dad has a Jack Russell, and he's obviously not killing venomous snakes out here in the middle of Canada, but he kills several gophers a year, and he'll bark at a squirrel for 12 hours
and
straight.
It's quite a big thing, actually.
They can be a little bit larger. I mean, it's just amazing. They're just like the most tenacious dog you could have. But I'm amazed that they could actually get a cobra without taking a bite.
They are insane. A lot of farmers in South Africa. Jack Russell is a very common dog here. And one of the reasons is because they are so good at killing rats and snakes and a whole bunch of things like that. Yeah.
So you had this experience with seeing the adder and having the preserved cobra, and then so did that draw you in? I guess that was starting to pull you into the venomous side as well, not just reptiles.
Yeah, and then also that snake park was literally insane. So, and I've always been quite an outgoing person. So even as a kid, I would go there. There was a guy working there. I'd just spend hours with him, and eventually I got access to a lot of things. So I mean, I never worked or anything, but eventually I was going with him to the crocs and all of that. So there was a lot of exposure there. So that was great. But yeah, venomous snakes really became a thing later on. But snakes in general, and then obviously the Steve Irwin phase. But I was always I love Steve Irwin, but David Attenborough is like my all-time hero. So obviously a lot of those documentaries growing up also played a huge part in it, not just seeing what you see around you,
Right. What is the general, having to coexist with venomous snakes as a part of the daily life? What is the general perception of those animals just within the normal population? Are people killing them all the time? Or I guess this can lead us into the human-wildlife conflict.
Yeah. People hate snakes here.
Okay.
And when I say South Africa is a very, very diverse country. I mean, we have 11 official languages. So to each one of those languages, there's also specific cultures. So there's Xhosa, Zulus, Afrikaans, English South Africans. There's a whole array of people. And then South Africa also has Chinese, Indian, like myself, Portuguese, Italians, Jewish. We have everybody. Everybody hates snakes. It doesn't matter your ethnicity, your culture. Everybody hates snakes. So they're very heavily persecuted. There's obviously also a lot of fear behind some of the snakes that we get here, because a lot of the snakes we do have are venomous, and very. So there is a lot of fear towards snakes. We have something called snake shot even. So you get a little, it's like a shotgun thing, but for your 9mm. It's similar to bird shot. I don't know if people know what bird shot is.
Yeah.
But basically, you get a bullet to kill snakes. So people are absolutely petrified of snakes. And there's also, especially with our indigenous ethnicities, there are a lot of folklores and things related to reptiles in general and how they are evil. I remember in school, one of the girls literally lost her mind when the snake came into our classroom, because she was convinced that somebody was in her family would die now. So There's a lot of that. So, but everybody hates snakes here. Everybody. I've been involved with reptiles even to a professional point. I've opened a snake park and things like that. So I've done a lot of educational talks and things. I'd say every single time I finish an educational talk, I'll have somebody come and tell me their hero story of how they killed the mamba or they shot this puff adder, or it's just persecution.
And I always say that there is a reason for it, right? I mean, they are highly venomous, and they've everybody in their family probably has a story of somebody getting bit by a snake at some point, within the last 5 or 6 generations, and those stories get passed down, and so there is a reason for some of that folklore. But I imagine as a reptile lover and as someone who is passionate about these animals, it's probably difficult to live in a place where you're constantly the opposite of everybody.
Yeah, I will be honest. it's. I know a lot of people get like seriously emotionally affected, snake keepers, about this. For some reason, it's quite easy for me to understand their perspective.
Mm.
But it is important that everybody, no matter where you live, what you keep, it is important to share the message of what reptiles truly are. And yeah, I don't get so affected by the killings because I do understand it. But something where I would like to just make it clear is that I often say to people, and this could apply to every one of your listeners even, name a person you actually know that's been bitten by a snake. And it's even here in South Africa, there are snakes almost everywhere. I will always ask people, do you know somebody who's been bitten by a snake? 99.9% of the time, the answer is no. But a lot of the stories are very fear-based in the sense that somebody will be like, I got chased by the snake, or I almost got bitten. And I see this. I follow a lot of American, I'm also obsessed with dogs. And a lot of American Instagram pages and stuff will show a picture of a dead rattlesnake or some description and say, it almost bit my dog. Mm-hmm. These snakes are everywhere. They almost got my dog. I stood over the snake and it almost bit me. But it's fear driving that response because nobody's acknowledging the fact that it didn't.
Right.
It didn't bite you. I've literally, and I'm so grateful that I had 5 people with me at the time. I've stood on a puff adder in the bush by accident. I stood on a puff adder. I thought we were in like sort of a farmy area, and I don't know if you've seen those like quite thick black irrigation pipes, and it was a warm day. So first thing that went into my head is I'm standing on one of these, because it was a bit squishy, a black irrigation pipe that's been sitting in the sun. I stepped, I looked back, I saw the puff adder. My dog behind me didn't stand on it, but walked over the puff adder. I basically kicked my dog out the way. And I just started screaming, puff adder, puff adder. I was so excited. But the point is nobody got bitten.
Right.
I don't know. I personally, I do, but they're all snake handlers. I don't know somebody in my own, obviously I've dealt with people just because I'm in the sort of line of hobby or work, whatever. People that I personally know, I don't know anybody that's been bitten by a snake, ever. But there's a million stories of I almost, or my kid grabbed it and I killed it because it almost, but the snake never bites. So it's a lot of fear-based response from people, which I think is really sad because the truth behind it is the snake didn't bite you. You know,
it's the shark bite phenomena, right? I don't want to swim in the ocean because I don't want to get bit by a shark, but it almost never happens. But it does happen, but it happens so infrequently that it's not worth completely changing the way you live your life.
Yes, I mean, I don't know anybody that's been bitten by a shark, and I'm sure you don't either.
No,
but,
I know I don't.
I'm scared to swim in the ocean. I think about it, So it is just that it's a natural response from human beings. But yeah, people are just, it's always about fear. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if you or anybody's heard about mambas, black mambas chase people. Mm-hmm. I have never been chased by a mamba. I've chased the poor things. I've never been chased back,
Yeah.
But I've also had experiences with my friends. It's actually one of the funniest things I've ever seen. But we found this massive Southern African rock python just outside my mom's house. And me and my good friend and his fiance were with me. And if you give a rock python a fright, they will sort of move, they fling themselves away to get the motion going. So obviously, if they're moving away from you, they first sort of coil towards you and then they shoot off in the opposite direction.
Right.
These guys turned around and ran for their lives. This is a couple that love each other. They didn't even look to help each other. They just ran away. And from their perception, they were being chased because the last thing they saw was the snake jumping towards them. And that's where a lot of these stories come from. It's just pure fear response.
Right. And so yourself, because you are, involved in herpetoculture and whatnot, I know you do, house calls and whatnot and going to snake removals. Is that something that you do, I guess, just on a casual basis? Like some people know that you keep snakes, so they have a snake in their garden and they give you a call. I just want to take a quick break to thank one of the sponsors of today's video, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning community that has thousands of different courses in hundreds of different domains. If you're looking to improve or hone a skill right now, go check out Skillshare. They certainly have a course for you. For myself, I'm actually in the process of moving the Animals at Home Network website from a WordPress platform over to Squarespace platform. I'm tired of WordPress. It's slow and clunky, and I've always wanted a Squarespace website because I just love the way they look, but I've been too intimidated to do it because there's quite a learning curve, and that's why I'm going through the Skillshare course, Squarespace, Building Your Perfect Website by Kareem Hudson, which has been incredibly helpful teaching me how to navigate that platform. And I really am building a website that I'm super proud of and cannot wait to share with you. So if you're looking to hone a skill, whether that's web design, art, video editing, and more, go check out Skillshare. There is a link in the pinned comment as well as the YouTube description of this video. The first 1,000 people to use that link will have a free month of access to Skillshare, which is incredibly valuable, and I highly recommend going to do that. Let's jump back into the episode.
So I've been doing this since I was in high school. But basically, it's not me doing this. There's something in our area called reptile recovery. So I'm not the founder or any of anything to do with this specific project. But in order to actually catch a snake in South Africa, you need a permit. So you need a catch and release permit for problem reptiles, for instance. And you have to log every snake you catch and all of that. So there's now a dedicated group. There's not too many people on the group, obviously. But South Africa's also got a lot of security companies. Obviously, the crime is quite bad here. So most houses will have a security company, which includes things like armed response. They will come and meet you at your gate, and snake removal. So that's one of in almost all of them around my area, you get snake removal as part of your package. So it's them. And they will use us and we will sort of use them. But basically, it's a very tight-knit, small community of licensed individuals who go and catch these snakes whenever you can. I've got a full-time job. I can't do it all the time. I used to do a lot more when I was younger. But as a group, free of charge, we will go out and remove snakes from your home. And that works twofold. One, the snake's not getting killed. Threefold. Two, I know some data is extracted. So like I say, we log what snakes we catch. That goes into some sort of a database to sort of understand the numbers of snakes in our area. And then also it protects the people from these snakes, because a lot of snake bites that do occur is a snake getting attacked. If you're going to go and try and kill a snake with a spade, you try kill me with a spade, I'm also going to bite you. So yeah. A lot of that conflict happens at that point of actual physical conflict. So it's quite well known. So a lot of people know me and will call me for me. But most of the time I go out to do call outs, they contact somebody in the group. If we can't attend, we put on a WhatsApp group. And then the first person that's the closest and able to respond goes out and does it free of charge. Yeah, just for the passion of it.
Well, and I've seen a few of the videos of you doing these snake collections, and the thing that struck me the most is how, especially when you had that mamba a couple weeks ago, how relaxed you are. You're handling this thing, and it's kind of, it's a wild snake, it's a mamba, incredibly fast-moving, highly venomous, and you're just sitting there like casually talking to the camera, telling us a little bit about it before you release it, and I just don't know how. I mean, I guess you've done it so often that you're able to be relaxed, but it was just pretty amazing to see somebody so comfortable in a relatively dangerous situation.
I won't lie, I have been doing this since before I was 18. So I do think there's an element of, I'm so used to it, but I'll tell you a secret. If I go on a call out and I see a mamba, I'm not always overly excited. I am nervous. So I have trained myself to be calm, but trust me, I'm as steady as anything. But once I've released that mamba, or once I've got it in the tub, my hands do start to shake. A mamba is I've kept a lot of snakes. I've kept king cobras, a lot of serious snakes. Nothing on earth compares to a wild black mamba. Nothing.
Just
so
speed, intelligence.
Insane. I can't even get to any snake. I will catch anything with a tiny hook and a dodgy bucket if I have to, or a broomstick, whatever. I don't care. I'm very confident with all our cobras, all our adders, everything. A black mamba is just something that always just rattles me a bit. The their scientific name, Dendroaspis, okay, the genus, means tree snake.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people forget how arboreal they are, and they are long. They are extremely long. And they're not aggressive. They're very nervous. So you take something that's got the core strength and the power to be arboreal, highly, highly venomous, one of the most, if not the most advanced venom delivery system on earth. They literally tap you. They don't bite. They tap you. And that's enough. You're dead. You know what I'm saying? So that's why a lot of times with mamba bites, people get bitten multiple times, 2 or 3 times, because they're literally just so fast. It's just 1, 2, 3, you tapped, and now it's long. You've got it on a hook stick or a grab stick. It can come back on itself in seconds. It's petrified. And normally when you see them, when you get called out for them, it's on a hot day and they're active. They're looking for food. They're moving around, and you go and try and catch a hot mamba. That is a different. So I enjoy the thrill, and I love saving mambas, and I do think they're one of the most incredible animals on earth. It's an epic predator. But I do get nervous if I see that mamba. Well, I hear a call. We've got a big gray snake. Oh, I get nervous.
Yeah. You got to go into like performance mode and shed all the. You can't be thinking about anything else.
Because they will hurt you. They will hurt you.
That's the amazing thing about them, is how long they get. I actually had no. I mean, I thought like they were like 8-foot long snakes, but they can get much longer than that.
They get massive. So I can't think off the top of my head the maximum size. I haven't really seen. It's quite rare to find those really, really big ones. I think the biggest one I've seen is about, I can't remember if it was 3.4 or 3.6 meters. But
that's big.
You hold the tail end, and there's 3.5 meters the head, and you've got your little 1 meter snake hook. There's not lots between you and it. Yeah. No. So and they are a very scary snake. They are very, very scary snakes. Although I'll also say something. If you grab a mamba, I often try and use a hook stick. It doesn't always work that way. If you grab a mamba, it's a different story. But there are a lot of instances here in South Africa. I see it relatively often, actually. I'm not going to call mambas territorial, but I would say to a certain extent they're residential. So I don't know if they fight and protect the area. That would be territorial. But often, if a mamba is established and comfortable, you will see it basking in the same place. You'll see it going into the same hole. And they can actually coexist quite effortlessly with people. They can become very habituated. That mamba that I showed you in that video the other day that I put on the Patreon page, when I approached it, there were people all around. It's about a meter away off a very busy path where people work. It was relaxed in the tree. It had no fear. I approached it with my little grab stick so close, it didn't even budge. It was so habituated with human presence. But when I grabbed it, it's a different thing. Right. So a frightened, scared, stressed mamba is a very dangerous thing. But I've also had experiences 4 weeks ago. I was walking with my 2 dogs, and we bumped a mamba. We're walking through thick bush, and I could hear the grass movement, and I just looked left, and just past both my dogs and me, about a meter apart away from me, a mamba just came past and cruised. So as long as you don't mess with it, it's actually a very easy animal to live with.
Yeah, they're not looking to take down giant prey items. You're not. But I've never heard that venom delivery system piece before. I guess so. They're not really required to actually chomp and use their jaws to squeeze the venom into. It just comes out so quickly.
I will say it's one of, but I'm almost sure it is the most advanced in terms of speed and efficiency venom delivery systems of any snake. They are insane. They literally just tap. You don't get bitten. You don't get grabbed. Where some of our other big venomous snakes, like snouted cobras, they grab. Yeah. I've even seen them kill stuff in the wild, where I found one that had a chameleon, and it just bites it, and it even pushes it into the ground. It like bulldogs it.
Right.
While pumping venom. But your mamba just tap, follow, tap, follow, tap.
And then drop dead, eat.
Yeah, and I've actually just thought of this. If a lot of snakes that we find, especially in residential areas, have got some sort of damage, even in the bush. They've been bitten by a rat, or they've been ridden over. A lot of snakes look like they've been beaten up I don't think I've ever seen a mamba that has had a big bite mark or something because they're not engaging with the prey. It's just tap, wait. It's insane.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And it is, like I said, it's a beautiful species and one of the most, you're just drawn to it because of how incredible it is. So let's talk a little bit about the species that you've kept in the past. And we'll start with maybe, how you started keeping, and then we'll get to what you're doing now. But did you start keeping snakes pretty much immediately?
I got my first snake for my birthday in 2006, I think it was. So 2006. You guys also use grades, eh? First
yes.
grade, second grade. Yeah. So in 2006, I was in grade 6.
Okay.
So in grade 6, 2006, I got my first snake, a little corn snake, a normal corn snake. I begged my mom for it, and eventually I got it. It died. As most stories go, it didn't last too long. I didn't care for it very well. I think I heat stressed it in hindsight because I was being so young. My mom knows nothing about snakes. The pet shop gave me no idea of what I should do. I remember putting it in the sun, in its enclosure. I mean, that poor snake was getting hot and cold and hot and cold. It didn't last very long. Then, as a kid, I did catch a lot of snakes and keep a lot of snakes illegally, actually, because you're not allowed to take snakes out the wild here. I'll keep it for a week or two, release it. Then, by 2008, grade 8, I discovered the chicken. So I just went completely wild for poultry. Grade 10 came, 2010. I got a boa constrictor. So one of my very good friends, he gave me his boa, a normal BCI boa constrictor. Boa imperator now, it's no longer a subspecies. He gave me that. Its name was Connie the constrictor. I had that snake for many years, but also in grade 10, I got into falconry. So I was flying birds. I had a number of birds of prey. So I was very focused on poultry and birds, and I had cockatiels and parrots and finches and quails. I was very bird orientated. Then, because my mother also she's amazing. So my parents got divorced. So I lived with my mom and my sister. So this poor woman, my mother, just, I had to do a lot of convincing, but I was allowed. I mean, like I'm saying, I had birds of prey and chickens in a suburb. So she was very kind, but I had a rule: no snakes. Not too many snakes. I'm allowed snakes, not scared of snakes, but I'm not allowed to go. I can't have 1 million chickens, 1 million birds, and 1 million snakes. Grade 12 came, and one of the snakes that really got me into herpetoculture was a Taiwanese rat snake. And I walked into a pet shop. I think I was in grade 11. So 2011, I saw this little baby Taiwanese rat snake. So I said, no, I must. Bought this thing, kept it in a tub in my cupboard. Had little, made a beautiful setup in one of my mom's big Tupperwares. It was a tiny little snake. And then eventually I had to come clean and say, Mom, I got the snake. About 3 months later, my mom gave me a room. I had a snake room. So in grade 12, I was in it. Also around that same time, about 2010, 2011, I met one of my best friends now, Jeff. So he's 2 years older than me, which makes a big difference when you're still in school. And he's an ultra nerd. I mean, he's like excessive nerdiness. So he introduced me to a lot of things. And then I got into, taxonomy and a whole bunch of when you really dive into snakes. So I got into it at a young age. So grade 12, got my snake room. I had boa constrictors, Aki monitors, jungle carpets, Burmese, ball pythons, a whole bunch of stuff. I was never allowed venomous snakes. I was allowed to catch them, but I wasn't allowed to keep them. And then after so much begging, for my 18th birthday, my mom got me a Ronkhals. Okay. A baby Ronkhals. And it is a highly venomous snake, but compared to most venomous snakes, it's very mild. I'm almost sure to say that unless you have some sort of a crazy reaction, a juvenile bite, you might not even need intense medical care. You're going to be in a lot of pain. It is you don't want to get bitten. It is highly venomous, but I'm saying it's not that hectic. Moved to my dad, had all these snakes with me, carried on with my falconry. And then I went to university where I kept a whole bunch of snakes under my dorm room bed. I also, because of Jeff, both him and I used to go almost every weekend to a very good snake park that was close to our university. So I kept a lot of my snakes there. And we also worked there all the time, doing educational talks. And by that time, we were quite proficient with just general herpetoculture and understanding snakes. And then, in varsity, things just got worse and worse for me. So then I moved into an apartment with my friend, Byron, next door, Jeff, and our other friend, Rory. So we were both in these 2-bedroom apartments next to each other. I had bred monocled cobras in that room. I had Taiwanese rat snakes, Cape cobras, corn snakes, boomslangs, puff adders. I had about 30 odd snakes, and he himself had gaboon adders, anacondas, a whole bunch of stuff. Then the following year, I moved into a dig, so like a house where you rent with your friends. Then I just went wild. I had about 11 species of cobra, house snakes. I had a giant bin with fish. I had turkeys, chickens, ducks, quails, a bird of prey. I had an African goshawk. I just went. There was no parents there holding me back. It was just me and varsity. I just went wild. It was a very loud house, especially with the turkeys. After that, my first job was actually at a crocodile farm. So that's where I ended up breeding Nile crocodiles. And then I became the curator of that park. So I opened a snake park there, did educational talks there, went overseas for a year. I had a friend that looked after my snakes. That was really kind of him. And then basically came back to South Africa, and that was a few years ago, but sort of that's where I am now.
So during that time when you were at your peak of, all these different animals, did you have a direction, or was there a purpose behind what you were doing, or were you just kind of going, I like this, and I want to try breeding this?
I love just keeping animals. Okay. So I think because I've literally been doing it since I was very young. I mean, when I say in 2008, I'm 14 years old, I had maybe 40 chickens. So it's part of my programming to always not need to have a lot of animals, but I can manage it quite well, I feel, at least.
Right.
So I've always dealt with having a lot of animals. And the biggest thing with my mom, like I said, was just me, my mom, and my sister. I never had that fortune of, when your parents buy you a dog and they end up caring for it. Never. I had to every morning wake up to go feed the chickens, clean the snakes. So it is just part of my general lifestyle, but I've never had a direction. It's not that I just buy. I don't do compulsive purchasing. I don't just get everything because I think it's cool. It's always been within my limit and my budget, which is also very important. People tend to forget that. Mm-hmm. But I've never had a strict direction. Where Jeff, our herpetoculture journey is quite linked. We chat all the time, but he's always been even right now, he keeps only pythons. And I don't keep only one thing. Yeah.
Was there, because it sounds like at one point you were really heavy into cobras. Was there something that was drawing you towards them? And is there a reason you wanted to work with them?
Yeah, they were one of the scariest things. So like I said, I got those monocled cobras. I got that in the beginning of 2013. And I remember going to a snake park, a local snake park, and buying an albino male and a normal het albino female. And I was so excited, and I remember getting home with those snakes and absolutely just being horrified. I almost cried. I just thought, what are you doing? Yeah. If this thing bites you, there's no anti-venom, you're going to die. So
it's like one of those out-of-body experiences when you buy it, right? It's like you become a different person to do. You're like, am I actually doing this? And you kind of watch yourself do it, and then you get home and you're like, what the hell did I just do?
Exactly that. And the difference was, I'm not lying, 4 months, I was nagging, and when are the eggs going to be laid, and when are they hatching? And I was so prepared. I had the setups. I had everything I needed. I was so excited because now I'm getting real serious snakes. Got those things, tiny little babies like this. I shat myself for about a week. I remember lying in bed and I said, what are you doing? What are you doing? But then after working with them and also catching cobras in these call outs, I really, there is just something about a cobra that just, not only are they quintessential, they're not only that, you think, if you think of a snake, you think of a cobra. It's the diversity that gets me more. There's so many types of cobra with so many different hunting mechanisms, and some spit, some don't. Some are variable, like Cape cobras, many colors. Some are, all look the same. There's just so much variety in cobras. And then obviously I was young and dumb and think cobras are cool. And I mean, nobody can deny that part of it. I think I would still be in cobras if I wasn't scared for my life, because I think I kept 12 or 14 species of cobra, and some of them were samars, Naja samarensis, which is one of the most venomous snakes in the world that not many people have in the world in their collections. And now if I get bitten, I'm dead. There's not a if, but, maybe. And being a bit older now, I have learned, often you see these guys on Instagram free handling, or you 16 and you got a cobra. And I mean, I can't judge. I was 18 when I started getting these venomous snakes, but back then I was 100% sure that I knew, this is my life. Mm-hmm. It's my risk. Grow up. And then things change. You know what I'm saying? So there's often those scenarios where older people tell you something and you blow it off until you become an older person. And venomous snakes is the number one example of that, because people always say, be careful, be careful, be careful. And I've never been bitten. I mean, I've been keeping snakes and handling snakes for however many years. I've never been close to being bitten. But you are a complete idiot if you think that a mistake cannot happen, mm-hmm. and you will die. It's not, and I don't know, when you're young, you're not scared of the concept of you will die.
Yes, yeah.
But I've got things to do now. I've got a fiance to marry, dogs to play with. I can't die just yet. Mm-hmm. Especially from my hobby. I mean, how shocking would that be?
Yeah. It reminds me a lot of, when I think back on how I used to drive my parents' car when I was like in my late teens and early 20s, and I just cringe thinking about how dumb you are as a teenager, just speeding excessively. Like, let's see how fast we can go on the highway, going like 160 or 180K, just for no reason, doing like weird burnouts and like flattening the tires. And I'm just like, that is just so dumb. Like, not only are you ruining the equipment, like it's just so ridiculously, unreasonably dangerous for no reason.
But you tell your 18-year-old self that, he's
exactly.
not going to listen.
No. Yeah, and like, I'm perfectly good at this.
Tell somebody the same thing, but it doesn't go in. And I know it doesn't go in because it didn't go into me.
Yeah.
So
you realize, okay, I'm going to move on from some of these. So I guess you sold them. And now how has your collection evolved from there? You still are keeping venomous, but you don't have the same potency maybe.
Yeah. So I'm in a transition period right now, but I got rid of, over a long period, you can't just drop these snakes off at anybody. Over a long period, I have been getting rid of exotic venomous snakes. So I don't want anything exotic anymore. I do keep some stuff that is, pretty serious, but I know there's a hospital, is it 5 minutes from my house? Mm. And I know, because we live in the area we do, there's normally anti-venom stock there. And I only want indigenous stuff twofold. One, I'm not definitely going to die if I get bitten. I might die. And two, I think a lot of us lose track of why we began to love reptiles. And a lot of us fall in love with them because of that natural element, that National Geographic, that zookeeper type style. And as soon as you come into herpetoculture, it becomes about what are you keeping and all this sort of species and this and this and this. It's not about actual keeping. Mm-hmm. And I want to fall back in love with that original feeling. And that was indigenous snakes that did that for me. So I also, twofold, it's safer, but also I prefer indigenous snakes. I do. I love the snakes that we get in around our area and in South Africa in general.
So what are some of the species that you have now that you're keeping?
I will quickly list them off the top of my head. I might forget some. And bear in mind, it's not all indigenous now. Like I said, I'm in a transition. But general vipers, I've got puff adders, horned adders, gumprax vipers, white lip tree vipers, and eyelash vipers. Cobras, I've got forest cobras, Cape cobras, snouted cobras, and Cape coral snakes. Pythons, I've got Burmese, balls, retics, Bredleys, Southern African rocks. Colubrids, I've got Florida kings, Sinaloans, milk snakes, corn snakes, some gray banded, Taiwanese rat snake. And then I think the rest are all house snakes and house snake morphs. Mm. So at this point, I have exactly 60 reptiles. I'd say a little bit less than half of them are house snakes because I'm really enjoying house snakes at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, house snakes are a species that should be more popular, especially in this part of the world, than they are. And maybe they will be at some point, but they're such a great little species. They stay small, and they do have morphs for people. They come in different varieties. And are they naturally varied in color as well, or are they in the wild? Are they fairly consistent? Maybe you could talk
They
about
are
that.
very variable. Yeah, they're very
Okay.
variable. It's a very interesting species. I mean, also, I've had people on my Instagram page message me and say, "Hey, can you send me habitat shots of where these house snakes come from?" It's impossible. They are everywhere. They are literally everywhere. In my garden, deserts, thick bush, everywhere. They're everywhere. So they're very easy to keep. Obviously, animals in the wild that tend to be, have a great range with variable habitats tend to be better in captivity.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of morphs coming out now. And what I appreciate about the morphs, I don't keep a lot of morphs. I'm not against morphs. Even my ball python pair. I mean, I've had various morphs, but I end up selling them very quickly because I just love that natural element. So I do have a butter male and then a normal female, but all the high end stuff I got rid of. But there's something about, I don't know if it's because I'm from South Africa and I deal with these snakes. There's something about brown house snake morphs that don't seem budgie cage. I don't know. I always relate corn snakes and ball pythons to budgies because if you have some sort of exotic bird, you have an aviary with plants. If you have a budgie, you put in that little blue cage with a little water bowl and that poor thing lives in there. And I feel like we treat snakes the same way.
Right.
But there's still for me an allure. And even if I see an albino house snake, I want to see it in a natural setup. I don't want to see it in a rack. And I don't know if it's just me and my experience, but I do think house snakes may lend themselves towards that, which in the long run, and also a lot of house snake keepers internationally tend to keep their snakes more like that than a rack style. And maybe by the blessing of the herpetoculture gods, it's the house snakes that will pull people to this direction where you can appreciate a morph in a natural setup at the same time, because they just seem to not be very linked, those two things, morphs and natural setups. I don't know why, but it just appears to be that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And yeah, if you're dealing with a very generalist species, you could keep them however you like, and they're going to thrive, and they don't get huge, and they come in sort of interesting colors, and a relatively easy species to care for. It's like a perfect pet for the hobby.
It is literally the most perfect snake. They're very python-like. A lot of people might compare them to colubrid, but they're not even a colubrid. It's a lamprophid or lamprophidea. It's a sort of a subgroup, and they are very python-like. I mean, a lot of people that deal with them, spotted pythons and Stimson's pythons, and Teresia, from Australia. It's very similar, and they I wish I had one with me now, but they are so small, compact, easy to keep, forgiving. They naturally eat mice and rodents. So that's a benefit. It's just an all-round great snake, easy to handle, color variations. Oh, and to answer your question, the natural variation is huge, from pattern to stripes to dark browns and almost reds, almost anything. I mean, I catch house snakes regularly. Sometimes they've got serious patterns. Sometimes they're patternless. There's a lot of diversity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of Amazon tree boas in that way, where they come in several colors, different patterns, and it's just there's that natural variation, which is just so fascinating to see.
It's beautiful. And then obviously, if I'm just in terms of morphs, I'm talking about Boyden or Lamprophis, but it's Boyden capensis. So that's what we get down here, and a lot of the morphs are with them. But then you get all the other species like Phylogenosis, lineatus, Fredi, Mentalis. There's a lot of diversity species-wise with house snakes. And I think in terms of diversity, herpetoculture goes in two directions. Either goes a million morphs of the exact same species, or something that like the retic guys are doing at the moment with the different localities. Or, or you want to collect all the different species of milk snake or whatever. House snakes give you best of both worlds. You can have a whole collection of different species and at the same time morphs of just one. It's great in that sense.
Yeah. I'm thinking that species is going to take hold at some point in the next maybe 5 or 6 years, and we'll start seeing more of it. I think that'll be great.
I hope so. I don't think they will ever become, unfortunately. I know people tend to put layers to snakes, but I think they'll always remain a beginner snake. But the interesting thing, once again, is there is diversity within that group, because a Boyden capensis, a African house snake or brown house snake, Cape house snake, I don't know what your listeners would be calling them. That's an easy snake to keep. But then you get Lamprophis guttatus, the spotted house snake. They're hardly bred in captivity. So there is challenge, there is that nitty-gritty challenge if people are wanting that. And there's Aurora house snake. So it's a very diverse group in general. And there's a lot of scope for tech guys that want to fiddle on their setups and be technical, and guys that just want to keep a few snakes as pets.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Why don't we chat a little bit about your move to start keeping outdoors? Because I know that's something that you're currently striving to, and I think it sounded like last time we chatted that you have some pretty big plans, I think, for your property. So maybe you could talk about the property that you live on, because I think it sounded pretty amazing. And then this move to outdoor keeping.
Yeah, so I've been renting for a while, so now we've just bought a house. It's 2,000 and something square meters, the property. So it's not massive, but it's pretty big. There's an outdoor room, so a room that's completely separate from the house. So I'm almost finished renovating that to convert that into a snake room, where I'll keep a bit more of my arid species and things like that. But then I really want to go and build massive outdoor enclosures. And that whole idea is generally a big move based on this channel, to be honest. So I started listening to this channel about 2 years ago. Maybe just a little bit less, but about 2 years ago. And it's been a huge inspiration for me, because what I've done is I've become conscious of my keeping. So it's easy to, it's not like I was a rack keeper, but I wasn't thinking about the benefits for me and the benefits for the snakes. And there's just been this whole shift in my mentality towards herpetoculture. And a big part of that is things like lighting and space and hides and live plants and all these things that advancing herpetoculture, you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. But for me, the peak of that, listening to the podcast, people like watching Camp Kennan and Tom Crutchfield, outdoor is the ultimate. So it is a scary concept, doing outdoor keeping. I was petrified. And I was renting. So what I did is I built outdoor enclosures myself that were movable, not too big. So I could move them when I moved, and I could just sort of test the waters. I'm now in my second winter of keeping snakes outdoors without any heat, without lighting, heat pads, nothing, just
the sun.
Just outside, yeah. I do, because they are movable, I do move them and adjust the location, depending on the season. But the benefits I have seen are insane. It is absolutely insane. So my next step now is I want to be able to walk into my enclosures and walk in them. I want big water pond, like big ponds in there. I want big branches. I want trees to grow in these things. I want it to be massive. So I am slowly downscaling my collection as I get rid of these exotics. And that would give me, I just want to have massive enclosures. I just want to have absolute massive outdoor enclosures. And the place where I'm building it is perfect, because in terms of the sun, I've now lived here in summer and winter. So now I understand the sun movement very well. And I'm quite confident with where I'll build each species enclosure. So yeah, that's very, very exciting project for me. I'm busy doing it right now. So it's great.
So what species did you do your trial run with those portable outdoor enclosures?
Yeah, so I looked at two things. Snakes I know well, individuals that I know well.
Okay.
And species that I know that are native. So a lot of the snakes that went outside are snakes that I've owned for 10 plus years. And it's because I know them. I'm very well aware of if they are uncomfortable or if they're getting a bit sick, or I know what they can handle and what they can't. So those would be good for me, because then I could read them much better than a snake I just got. I use snouted cobras, puff adders, Cape cobras, and Taiwanese rat snakes. And I set each enclosure up according almost to the species. And then I just monitor them closely. In the past year and a half, I've only pulled them out once. And I am not condoning anybody does this, but I have been very surprised at the temperature variances that a snake can handle. in winter, this winter's been quite mild. Last winter was so cold that we were hitting for about 3 weeks. At about 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning, we're hitting 4 degrees Celsius.
Wow.
So that is freezing. That is shocking. I would go check them every day just to make sure I'm not killing my snakes. And they handled it very well. So I was very surprised by that. I sort of predicted it, but the 4 degrees was a bit hectic. But the only time I pulled them out was one winter when it was about 3 or 4 degrees and a hailstorm came through. And with that sudden drop and it dropping, I think it dropped to -2 for an hour or so, I just didn't want to risk that.
Right.
But other than that, they've been outside experiencing all the temperature fluctuations. And what's happened is they've become so in sync with their natural behavior. My Cape cobra, I didn't physically see for, I think, 3 months that winter.
Wow.
It lived under this rock. And what I used to do is go and knock on the rock. And I used to, it would hiss at me. I think, okay, well, the Bliksom's still alive. Well, the guy's still alive. And then that's how I would operate. Their feeding cycles. And it's just, as a keeper, everybody, and this is the most important part, is to look at the reptile. But we forget that the whole reason any of us do that is actually it's self-oriented. But we keep snakes for ourselves. You can't tell me you keep a snake for a snake. That's rubbish.
Yeah.
And often people will focus so heavily on the snake, which is right. But what I've gained from it as a keeper is insane. To go out and see my snakes crawl out as the sun rises, to go and bask and hide in the heat of the day and do all these sort of, and fall a part of the natural rhythm of life has been so rewarding. To see your snake basking in the sun, there's nothing better. I don't know why it's such a simple thing, but it's amazing. It's amazing.
Well, it just feels like you've done something right? When you see the snake utilizing the sun and it's sitting there and it's getting warm from the sun, it's not too hot, it's using it properly, and you just feel like, okay, as a keeper, you've nailed this setup.
I've nailed it. When you see a snake in the most natural environment that you can provide, it is insane, because you're no longer watching. I'm not looking at my pet snake. I'm looking at a Taiwanese rat snake. Mm-hmm. As a Taiwanese rat snake. It's not my pet Dot or whatever your snake's name is. It's the true essence of that snake is being revealed. They would sleep on warm nights. They perch. On cool nights, they go in. It's insane. It is just the most rewarding thing. And I do believe that most of us keep reptiles because we are chasing that natural experience. We want to be little zookeepers and David Attenboroughs. Mm-hmm. And by extending yourself and creating these environments, you get there. You get that rush. You get that, wow, that's insane.
Yeah. So if you do some walk-in enclosures, I mean, some of the species that you listed off were big, like the Burmese and whatnot, but most of the species that you listed were relatively medium to small species. Are you still planning on having that large of enclosures for some of these guys?
Yeah, I'm still stuck on that. They're going to have massive enclosures.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Walk-in is a big word, for like brown house snakes. But I know some. I also do a lot of cohabbing, and I have cohab different species very successfully. So I do want to try some of that. But I will have pit-style enclosures and maybe not walk-in, but very large enclosures for things like house snakes,
sure,
and stuff like that. And what I also want to try, I'm not sure if I'm going to do this yet, is that building that I'm talking about where my snake room will be. I've already bought all the wood and stuff. I'm going to be building enclosures built into the room, so not loose enclosures. And what I want to be able to do is have an indoor enclosure with a PVC pipe that runs through the wall, that I can put a cap on either side of that PVC pipe, and on the outside of the wall, bolted a metal frame with mesh, and maybe a pot plant, very simple, maybe a pot plant and just some bark chips on the outside. So the snake has the option to be inside or outside. And if it is cold, I'll have the opportunity to, sort of close that PVC pipe and lock them in. I'm thinking of that as well, especially for the smaller species. But unfortunately, some of the species I'm still going to have to keep inside, the smaller stuff, purely because summers are very humid and tropical. So I can't keep big species outside. I'm a bit nervous too, just yet.
Well, yeah, and keeping really small species is, asking for them to go missing, really. What are you using for mesh? I have
to design those cages as well. And the mesh I do have is tiny.
Okay.
So I think my house snakes, if I don't keep them all permanently outside, I think I'll keep them in groups and maybe alternate them. I'm not so sure yet. But yeah, you don't want to lose your pet house snake.
No. And will you come up with something to put into the enclosures so if you do get a drop into the negatives that they'll have a place? I mean, you talked about using the actual building, but what about outside enclosures that are standalone?
I think I will do that. I've been trying to avoid using any sort of electricity or anything man-made. I don't know if that's not the right word, but I want to be as purely natural as possible. But I think I will end up putting big nest boxes with heat inside, just a basic heat pad, and sort of only turn it on if the temperatures really drop. So I will do that. But I think that's as far as I go. I won't overheat them. I won't give them. I mean, I find that necessary stress of life, of temperature variations is important. It's part of enrichment for these animals. They deal with it on a daily basis. I find vine snakes. Sometimes the other day, 4 days ago, I caught a vine snake, Telethornis capensis, that was in a parking lot. It could barely move. It was so cold. And that's a wild snake doing wild snake things. So I don't want to be too involved, but I definitely will put in some basic houses with some heating pads in there.
Yeah, because you don't want to have to go and move every animal through the next hailstorm type thing. You want to have an option to give them some shelter. But so when you said that you saw their feeding cycles change, what were some of the things that you noticed as far as, we talked about the basking and the behavior, but it sounds like there might have been more there.
They go off food themselves. So, I mean, that happens in a normal setup, but it's interesting to see how they brumate themselves. They manage their own cycles. Even in winter now, in summer, they come out and bask almost every day. In winter, they stay in the coolest hide undercover, even on a hot day. So they avoid heat, which I find very interesting because they're sort of aware of the cycle. With temperatures at night still drop, even though in the day it warms up, but they'll avoid the heat in the day. They do go off food by themselves. So a cobra, if anybody's owned a cobra eats anything. I got a cobra, snouted cobra, that's named Jeff after the guy I was talking about earlier, Jeff. He gave it to me. I've had the snake for probably 11 years or so. That snake has eaten anything at any time. And when I say anything, I mean everything. The first time ever he refused food was when he started living outside and winter was coming. It wasn't even there yet. We just feel that pinch in the air. Yeah. And he really started refusing food. And I was like, wow, this is very interesting.
That isn't. Yeah, it would be the natural instinct to not fill your gut with a heavy digestive load when the temperatures are cooling. It's just more of a protective mechanism, I guess.
Yeah, 100%. I'm more sure of it. I'm sure of it. I would be interested to keep some of the other species because, in our area, black mambas, puff adders, I think it's mainly them two. They breed in winter. So they go off food for a different reason. So I would be curious to see their behavior during winter because they're very active during winter, breeding, and males do combat. Both species engage in male conflict over females. So it'd be interesting to see what they do there.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing this. And I know when we talked about this last time, we were all convincing you to make a YouTube channel. And I hope you do some sort of filming or at least put it on your Instagram because I'm sure people are going to want to see this.
Yeah, I think for now, I'm not a very social media type person. So I think obviously the Patreon group is really good. I mean, we all get on quite well. There's become its own community of itself. So I'm sure over the next few months, I'll mainly share on the Patreon page. I don't think I'm ready for a YouTube channel yet, but maybe I'll put a bit of it on Instagram for sure.
Yeah. Because it sounds it's amazing, and I really can't wait to see what you end up doing there. We have covered a lot today. Is there anything that we didn't mention that you wanted to mention before we wrapped up?
Yeah, not really. It's just last little point on that human wildlife conflict thing that we spoke about earlier.
Yes, I
just think it's really important that everybody, whether you've got one little corn snake or whatever you've got, it's very important for us as reptile lovers to every opportunity you can. I'm not saying show off and go with your Burmese python to a shopping mall, but just share that information of these animals aren't that bad. Because every little bit counts. And a big thing that I've noticed, especially in South Africa, is people are quick to complain. And it's a common trend everywhere. People say habitat destruction is the worst. they're cutting down the rainforests of the Amazon or whatever. Your house where you live is habitat destruction. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we're forcing ourselves as a species, as human beings, we have forced ourselves upon this world where these poor animals have nowhere else to go except coexist with us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so important that you don't take any animal for granted, not just reptiles, birds, everything. We've come into a world when it's that, what do they call it, the Anthropocene, or I can't remember the term, but a world where it's run by human beings.
Yes.
And every little bit of room that we make available to them, they will take advantage of it. I said every day, animals and human beings can coexist. There is some conflict here and there, but as long as you let them be and they let you be, it is good. I mean, I've literally seen people being eaten by crocodiles here. And at the same place, there is a peaceful coexistence where crocs won't hurt people. So it just depends on how you have to be aware of wildlife, and don't go swimming in a river if you know there's crocodiles. Don't go poke the snake if you know it's venomous. And there is an opportunity for people to coexist, 100%.
That is really important, actually, and even for myself, I tend not to tell people that I keep snakes and whatnot. And I think the point that you're saying is, find a time to mention it and make sure people are aware that because the response is always the same. Really, you keep snakes? Why do you keep snakes? And then you can open the door for maybe a 1 or 2 minute just little segment that you can talk about them and how fascinating they are, and maybe invite them over to see. And it's funny, even me who has this podcast, I talk about reptiles all the time. I still tend to hold back that information when I'm talking to people because I want to avoid that, like, okay, here we go. They're going to find it weird, and now I'm going to have to go through this whole thing. But that is incredibly valuable. Every time someone does that to a mainstreamer that doesn't care about reptiles, it's going to reduce that conflict.
100%. And I think people that love reptiles forget something. You show your love. It doesn't matter what you speak about. If you're passionate about something, you smiling and your energy conveys the beauty of whatever your passion is. Most snake people, you catch them in a snake conversation, you're locked in for 3 hours and you could talk until the cows come home. As soon as you start speaking to people about snakes, it's not necessarily the facts. It's them seeing your passion, your love for these animals. And it enters. We're social beings. We read off each other's emotions and our facial expressions. Just share. Tell people about the snakes. Don't go brag and say, I've got a 10-meter cobra. Just say, they're actually not that bad. And mine's got this name. And it just makes them easier to accept. And I think, it's really important for all of us and with all animals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I think that's a perfect place to wrap this up. Rom, can you tell everybody where they can find more of you online?
Yeah, so I have my Instagram page, the Croc River Collection. I hate Facebook, so I'm not on any other sort of social media platform. So only Instagram. And then obviously I do share videos on the Patreon page. So if anybody wants to see so I've been catching a few snakes. I'll take a quick video and share it with everyone on the Patreon page. It's a great community there, and I have been enjoying it. So I share all my videos there. And other than that, it's just Instagram. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for that. And yeah, if anyone's interested in seeing those videos, that's through the Discord channel, through the Patreon page. So Rom, first, I appreciate you supporting the show by listening to it and also being a patron. I really do appreciate that a ton. And then also really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing all these stories. I had a blast chatting with you. So I know the listeners will enjoy this as well. So thank you so much for being here, and we'll have to do another one in the future.
Yeah, that would be great. And then, once again, I'm actually, as I'm sure the listeners have heard, the show has influenced me greatly. So, I just want to thank you. I mean, it's been a great podcast, and it's really inspirational, and it's literally changed. I've been keeping snakes for 16 years, however long. The last 2 years have been probably the most fulfilling for me, and 90% of that is because of the show. So, thanks, and looking forward to all the other episodes.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate that. I'm super happy to hear that. So yes, thank you so much.
Yeah, sweet.
All right, that is the end of that episode. Rom, thank you so much for chatting with me. Again, I really enjoyed that conversation. The passion that you have for these animals and the excitement that's in your face and in the tone of your voice, it just makes it so enjoyable to have a conversation with someone like that. I know the listeners will think the same, so thank you so much. Listeners, if you enjoyed the podcast, let us know. You can head to the YouTube comments there. That's the easiest way to have myself and Rom both see what you thought of the episode, but you can also send me messages on Instagram or Facebook at Animals at Home CA on Instagram. You can find me there. If you are interested in more information on the network or this podcast, head to animalsathome.network.com. If you want to support the show, easiest way to do that is just by sharing on any social media platform or also by rating the podcast on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Both have a rating and a review option, and those really do help us bump up the visibility of the network in those two apps. So if you haven't done a review or a rating yet and you want to provide a 5-star rating or whatever you think the podcast is worth, we would greatly appreciate that. And if you do want to support the podcast otherwise, you can also go to patreon.com/animalsathome. There you can interact with Rom right in the Discord chat, and you can see him sharing these incredible videos of the snakes and these things that he's working with and relocating and whatnot. Thank you so much to Custom Reptile Habitats for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. As I said through the intro, lots is going to change in this room with Custom Reptile Habitat supplies. Paul's already sent me a bunch of enclosures. There's a few more in the mail, or that will be in the mail in the next probably month or so. And every single one of these animals, except for my day gecko, is getting a new enclosure. The day geckos, I recently did hers, but everybody else is getting big upgrades, basically doubling the size of every enclosure, because some of these dimensions and some of these cabinet things that I built for my boas a long time ago are weird. So I'm expanding the dimensions, and it's going to be exciting, and I cannot wait to build those habitats with you guys helping me along the way. And I think that is it. I will see you guys in the next episode.